Okay. Well, the question that was posed by Aaron Relentless was basically challenging us to take a look at our favorite games and assess the flaws within, both within the game and within ourselves. I'm not really sure what my favorite game is, although these days I'm pretty sure that with my appreciation of the Ubiquity Roleplaying System so high that it's got to be one of those. It's probably All for One, but we'll come back to that. The game that's been my favorite for the longest, or at least been among my favorite games for the longest, would have to be Call of Cthulhu. Now, I haven't really messed around very much with basic role-playing, but Call of Cthulhu I've played every edition that there is. So, clearly, I'm a big fan of it. I don't have any illusions about the game per se, but one of the things that I find it very difficult to avoid saying is that it's easy to use a percentile-based system. Because really, the same problems with using that style of system come up again and again, so it can't be easy. But you want to say, or at least I want to say, that this game is so easy. But really what I'm saying is, it was easy for me. And that's a flaw. Because when someone picks up this game, they've heard that it's easy to use, they know it's a percentile system, so that's easy to use, and no complicated dice mechanics or anything like that. But then what they get is a game that's, well, ostensibly set in the 1920s, which players may or may not know anything about, that is so prone to misinterpretation in terms of framing roles that entire game lines, as I'm looking at you, Gumshoe, entire game lines were created to negate that problem. A problem which a lot of people like me think is not a problem. And if enough people think something is a problem, it really is a problem. Except it's not a problem. I'm clearly showing my bias now. Yeah, so that game definitely has to be there. So, what are the problems, the real problems with the percentile-based system, and therefore a problem with Call of Cthulhu? Really, it comes down to framing roles, because in a percentile-based system, and I looked at this in greater detail than I will here in my series on RuneQuest, really what you're looking at is a pass or fail system, and especially now, there are systems out there which provide a wider range of results than simply passing or failing. And the temptation is, especially in heated gameplay, for it to be pass or botch. And no iteration of the rules to date has all by itself created a mindset in the players and the keepers that obviates this problem. This problem exists and persists as more and more people pick up the game. You have people that instinctively get it, and you have more people that don't. And so, problem. Big weakness. In earlier editions of the game, sanity was also a problem, the way it was implied, but they've gotten better at producing the sanity chapter, and so this problem has decreased over time. But still, if you're picking up the game and trying to run it straight out of the box without being able to, truly master all the information that's now in this rulebook, chances are insanity will be a source of humor, percentile rolls will produce wild swings of outcomes, people are going to focus on missing percents by just 1 or 2 points, and the game will be unsatisfying. Doesn't need to be that way, but really, taking the game in a vacuum, teaching yourself how to play it, teaching your players how to play it, chances are you're going to encounter these problems. So, these are flaws. Another one of my top, most enjoyed games, dare I say favorite, would be Battletech. And because we're talking about role-playing games, we're talking about A Time of War. I really enjoyed this system. It has flaws, of course. It's one of those systems that relies on modifiers, and you'll get a feeling for how these modifiers work by getting comfortable with charts of modifier options and examples. And there are a lot of examples, so it really is quite easy to learn. But it's not easy to just do right out of the box. One flaw. The next flaw is that the Battletech universe is enormous. It would be incredibly daunting for someone to pick up that game and just expect to be able to run a MechWarrior experience for players. I pity people who've tried to do that. Way too much information, and with the page counts Catalyst had to work with, it's presented in a really a laudable style. But seriously, if this was your first exposure to MechWarrior, I really doubt that you would be able to play this game in any kind of comfort. I mean, it would just be an overwhelming amount of information to learn, plus a new system, plus learning how to scale up and down through the different zoom levels, from the personal level up through the mech level. All the technology, all the history, all the different factions. Difficult to play. If you're already into playing MechWarrior and have played any of the previous editions, you're going to love this. Flipping modifiers from positive to negative may be a headache for some, and this may be a source of homebrewing and other styles of workaround for others, or, you know, like me, you might just embrace it. Still, not an easy game to use fresh out of the box. As I promised in the beginning, it really is time to look at Ubiquity, which has been my focal point game for the last couple of years, and one that I enjoy immensely. And I've really enjoyed seeing my playgroups, the people that I've introduced it to, enjoy it just as much. So I like using Ubiquity, and I want to use it often. And even in this series on RuneQuest that I'm doing, every time I come to a new chapter in the rules and say, oh, this is how it's done in RuneQuest, I'm thinking, wow, this would be so much easier to do in Ubiquity. I even said that in a couple of clips, so you can see that Ubiquity is very much on my mind. Do I think it's the perfect system? No. And this is where I'm going to differ from Aaron a little bit. I don't think all of us have systems where we love them so much we want to use them for everything and we're blind to their flaws. I do think you can find a game that is probably the best game out there for you right now. It may not last, there may be a better one to come down the pike in the future. But even its flaws serve to create some kind of enjoyment in your group, if you know what I mean. So, you know, like, as I mentioned earlier with Call of Cthulhu and the insanity rules sometimes being used as a source of humor, if that's how your game, if that's how your players really want to play that game, then, you know, that flaw does, in a way, become a feature. But keeping with the spirit of the question, where does Ubiquity fall down? Where do I feel the need to defend it against its detractors, rather than say, you know, you're right, it does have that flaw? So, Ubiquity right now is in its first edition. However, that doesn't mean it hasn't evolved. Ubiquity was initially released for Hollow Earth Expedition and was designed to have this heroic pulp feel. And it has since been reprinted as part of the core rulebooks for Desolation, which is a post-apocalyptic fantasy game, All for One Regime Diabolique, which is a a Three Musketeers inspired swashbuckling supernatural horror game, and Leagues of Adventure, which is a Victorian styled exploration and invention game. Okay. Flaws with the system that I would cite. If we go back to Hollow Earth Expedition, I figure a lot of people will have difficulty with the artifact and magic rules, and a lot of people will have difficulty maybe interpreting how to use size for non-human creatures or objects. There may be some difficulty in dealing with scale, meaning what exactly happens if you have some kind of magical power used again, like a magic bullet used against a tank. Some people will say that, according to the rules of Ubiquity, you can, with a club, destroy a tank, because there isn't anything that expressly states, that's insane. I think for older gamers like me, maybe that kind of rule doesn't need to be explicitly stated. I don't know, but anyway, in keeping with the spirit of the question, these are some flaws. And the last thing is the continuous initiative system. Now, you will only find the continuous initiative system in Hollow Earth Expedition. It's been dropped from all the others. And this suggests that it really was problematic in a way that that even its staunchest defenders will have difficulty dealing with. In the other games, in Desolation and in All for One, we have very detailed magic rules, which I love. I get a real blast out of them. And now my players enjoy them a great deal too. But they were a big headache to get used to. Not because they're difficult to use, not because they're broken, but because they're easy. Now, when you're playing with Desolation, they have a very good way of introducing you to the magic system, so you know what kind of effects used to be possible and why these effects are difficult to produce now. And we won't get into those details, but it is, however, a very vague system with very few examples, and you'll find this is a common flaw to most freeform magic systems. Eventually, you'll come across something where you're not sure where it fits in the grand scheme of things magically, and someone is going to have to make a ruling. And the rules are not going to help you. In All for One, there are excellent mechanical descriptions, but in some cases, particularly the early cases, so the first ones that you encounter, they seem to fly in the face of what's been presented as the magical atmosphere or the setting. So the rules of setting and the rules of mechanics conflict. In other words, what it's possible to do with magic, a character in the setting might not choose to do, or might not even think of doing, but it's possible in the rules. Meaning that genre becomes one of the barriers between what characters would realistically do and what players might want to do. And as I've discussed in some of my posts on genre, that might not be the best way to communicate that. It will cause problems in groups, and I think I have to classify it as a flaw. Now, All for One in particular, well, all of the games really, are extremely well written, so I feel bad citing these things, which is kind of what Aaron is getting at in his clip. This is where I want to resist the fact that it's a flaw. But it's kind of a flaw. So, Ubiquity. Great game. Easy to learn. It's easier to be taught than it is to pick up just from reading the books. depending on how grounded you are in the particular genres being represented. And it is definitely a system designed to represent genre. This is not a system that you could apply to anything without some work. But you can apply it to a lot of things. Now, it's not a standalone game yet. It may never be. But of all the games that I've talked about in this increasingly lengthening clip, I would have to say that Ubiquity is the closest to the type of game, for me, that Aaron was getting at when he mentioned Swords and Wizardry for him. One final point I'd like to tack on is that system's important. And setting is important. And there will probably be some deviation among people who might want to reply to this question based on how important system or how important setting is to that person. I might be attracted enough to a setting to overlook its flaws and not feel the need to argue on behalf of those flaws. I just kind of think, yeah, well, we want to play this game. Whereas someone who is very heavily invested in system might feel more pressure to say that these flaws aren't flaws. It's hard to say, really.